I didn't notice the envelope at first. It was buried beneath utility bills and supermarket flyers, sitting quietly on my kitchen table like it had always belonged there. I only picked it up after my second cup of coffee, absently flipping it between my fingers. White, stiff, printed with the blue logo of Fairview National Bank. I paused. I'd never had any dealings with them. The moment I opened the letter, something inside me shifted. "Dear Mrs. Toiver," it began, "you are reminded of your overdue mortgage payment." Below, in bold, $7,243.80. I read that number twice before the words registered. The letter referred to a second missed payment for a mortgage loan of $950,000 issued in March. I stared at the page. I'm 67. I own my home, small, quiet, paid off decades ago with Harold before he passed. I don't need more space, and I certainly don't need debt. I haven't applied for any loan, especially not one close to $1 million. Yet there it was, my name, my supposed signature, and a clear warning that foreclosure proceedings would begin in 2 weeks if payment wasn't received. My hands trembled as I dialed the number listed. A young woman answered after a long wait. "Fairview National, how may I help you?" I told her who I was. I told her about the letter. She asked me to wait while she checked. I stared out my kitchen window at the garden Harold once tended. The peonies were blooming, which would have made him smile. He always said May was the month the world remembered how to be beautiful. "Mrs. Toiver," she returned. Our records show that on March 14th, a 30-year mortgage in the amount of $950,000 was issued under your name for a property located at Lakeview Terrace, number 27, in Concord. I felt the blood drain from my face. "That's impossible," I said quietly. "I've never signed anything like that. I don't even know where Lakeview Terrace is." "We have a complete application file," she continued, her voice tightening, "including your passport, social security number, and tax returns. Everything matches." "It's fraud," I said, firmer now. "Someone stole my identity." "In that case," she replied, "you should contact law enforcement and schedule a hearing with us. But please be advised, until the matter is resolved, we are required to hold you responsible for the payments." When I hung up, I sat there for a long time, fingers still curled around the phone. I tried to think of who could have done this. Who had access to my documents, my personal history, my trust? Something in her voice had changed. She was nervous, too nervous for someone supposedly uninvolved. And I couldn't ignore the way she rushed to take control of the situation, the way she always did when things slipped out of her hands. After I hung up, I looked down at the letter again. My fingers stopped shaking. There would be no panic this time, just quiet, methodical steps forward. That's when the phone rang again. Harper. "Mom, it's Zoe's birthday today. Don't tell me you forgot," she said, before even saying hello. "We're meeting at 3 o'clock. And please don't wear that awful green sweater. This is a restaurant, not your vegetable patch." I didn't answer right away. Harper didn't wait for responses. She had always talked at people more than with them. But today, I didn't have the strength to keep up. "I remember," I said. "I already have her gift. But Harper, something serious happened. I received a letter." "Oh, Mom," she groaned. "Not again. If it's another ad, just throw it away. You don't have to open every single envelope that lands in your mailbox." "It's not an ad," I said slowly. "It's from Fairview National. A mortgage in my name, $950,000. There was a pause. Not confusion, not shock, just stillness. That's not possible," she said finally. "Who would lend that much to a pensioner? You must be mistaken." "I'm not," I said. "It's all here. The letter, the amount, the address. Someone used my information and forged my signature. I'm going to the police." There was a longer silence this time. No, 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 don't do that, Harper said quickly, her tone shifting. Look, I'll come over after work. Let me look at it first. Please don't call anyone until I've seen it, okay? Okay, I said. I wasn't agreeing. I was observing. At 3 o'clock sharp, I was at the Golden Lily. It was the kind of place Harper loved. Sleek, overpriced, and proudly stingy with its portions. I'd worn my navy blue dress, the one I kept for special occasions. I'd ironed it myself that morning, trying to smooth out not just the fabric, but the unease crawling just beneath my skin. Lennox was already there, perched beside his wife Deirdre and their teenage children, Nolan and Marilyn. He didn't greet me with a hug, just a quick glance and a complaint. Mom, your hair's sticking out near your ear. Didn't you look in the mirror before leaving the house? I smiled faintly and said hello anyway. I didn't correct him. I'd long stopped expecting warmth from my son. The last time he'd called without needing something was... I couldn't remember. I slid into my seat and said hello to the children. They murmured a response without looking up from their phones. Deirdre offered a smile that never reached her eyes. I asked about Harper. Lennox waved a hand. Running late. Something about a crisis with one of the families she supervises. You know how seriously she takes that job. I nodded. Harper worked in social services. Her title always sounded noble. She once told me she was there to save children from unfit parents. I used to wonder if that line was meant to reassure others or to wound me. She arrived half an hour later, stepping in with her husband, Frank, and Zoe, 12 today, wearing a pearl pink dress that made her look older than she should have. Harper was all smiles, talking fast and loud, brushing imaginary lint off her dress, but her eyes flickered across the table quickly, toward me. Grandma, you came, Zoe said, like it was a surprise. Of course I did, I said. I'd never miss your birthday. I handed her the small silver box with the bracelet inside. A delicate piece with a star charm, one I'd chosen carefully because it mirrored one my own grandmother wore when I was a child. Zoe barely looked at it. Thanks, she mumbled, setting the gift aside. Then she turned to Marilyn and showed her something on her phone. Across the table, Harper leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. Mom, what story did you make up about that loan? I kept my eyes on my glass. I didn't make up anything. The letter's real. For God's sake, don't bring it up here. She straightened in her seat and said loudly, Mom, would you like soup or salad? The rest of lunch passed in that same uneasy rhythm. Harper and Lennox chatting about business, occasionally tossing me questions that sounded more like spot checks. Do you still remember Uncle Robert? You're doing okay in that big house by yourself, right? My house isn't big. 3 bedrooms, 1 kitchen, 1 living room. But to them, it's square footage they'd rather see liquidated. I've heard the suggestions before, you'd be more comfortable in a smaller place. It's too much to maintain. We know a lovely retirement apartment, Mom. I didn't answer their questions. I just watched them. I noticed how Harper and Lennox exchanged glances when Zoe opened her presents. When Zoe passed over the silver bracelet without even unwrapping it, Harper murmured, just loud enough, must be old-fashioned. I didn't respond. I wanted to say the bracelet was modeled after one worn by her great-great-grandmother. But what would have been the point? There's no explaining value to people who only understand price. When the party wound down, Harper told me she'd stop by my house in an hour. She didn't ask, just inform me. I took the bus home. My hands were clenched in my lap the whole ride. Something about Harper's presence, her sudden urgency, her discomfort, her over-smoothed words, felt off. She wasn't just brushing me off like usual. She was managing me. Back at home, I reread the letter from the bank. The address of the property jumped out again. Lakeview Terrace, 27. I knew that name. It was the neighborhood Harper used to talk about. The lakefront homes there are stunning, she once said when we passed it in the car. If only we could afford something like that. And now someone had. I turned on the computer Lennox gave me for Christmas, so you can keep up, Mom. I wasn't great with it, but I managed. I typed the address into a search bar and waited. The listing came up in seconds, a sprawling 2-story house with wraparound windows and a view of the lake. The price range hovered right around $1 million. The date of purchase matched the date of the loan. Just then, headlights flared in my driveway. I stood and looked out the window. Harper's car, a brand new SUV, replacing her old sedan, slid to a stop. She was early. She walked in without removing her coat. "Where's the letter?" I handed it to her silently. She scanned it quickly, and I watched the color drain from her face. "It's a mistake," she said. "Or maybe a scam. Someone must have used your details." "That's what I said this morning," I replied. "And I was planning to go to the police." No, she said, her voice tight. "Let me handle it. I have a friend at Fairview National. I'll talk to him. We'll clear this up." I nodded slowly. "I looked up the address too," I said. "Beautiful house, by the lake, and I couldn't help but notice you have a new car." Harper froze. "What are you trying to say?" she asked, her voice sharpened. "Nothing," I said. "Just observations." She clutched her purse tighter. "Look, I told you. I'll deal with this. You don't need to worry." "I think I do," I replied, "because if I don't, I'll lose my home." "No one's taking your house," she snapped suddenly. "God, Mom, why do you have to make everything so difficult?" Her cheeks flushed, and red blotches crept up her neck. There it was, the answer I hadn't wanted. "It's you," I said quietly, locking eyes with her. "You took the loan." She looked away. "Don't be ridiculous." "I may be old," I said, "but I'm not blind." She said nothing, just snatched the letter from my hands. "I'm taking this," she said, voice trembling. "And please don't do anything stupid. Don't call anyone. Don't go to the police. I'll take care of it." Then she turned and left, slamming the door behind her. I stood there in the quiet, looking at the empty space she left behind. And for the first time in my life, I realized my daughter didn't just think I was weak. She was counting on it. After Harper left, I didn't cry. That surprised me. There was a time, years ago, when just a sharp word from one of my children could send me spiraling for days. But that night, I just sat quietly in my armchair, hands folded in my lap, listening to the sound of the wind brushing against the eaves of the house. This house, the only thing I truly owned, and perhaps the only thing left that still felt like mine. I didn't sleep much. I kept hearing Harper's voice in my head, so familiar, so practiced, so careful. She hadn't denied it with outrage or confusion, just evasion, just management, and that was enough. In the morning, I called Audrey. She picked up on the third ring. "Winnie, are you all right? You never call this early." "I need to talk," I said. "It's about something serious." I told her everything. The letter, the bank, Harper's reaction, my search for the house online, the matching dates, the SUV, the sudden urgency. I told her how Harper had taken the letter and tried to wave me off like a child fussing over monsters under the bed. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Audrey said, "That woman is a snake." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "She's my daughter." "And you're her mother," Audrey replied. "But that didn't stop her from stealing your name, your signature, your security. Winnie, you have to go to a lawyer." "I don't even know where to start." I do, she said. I remember reading about someone in town, Rowan Jett. She's one of the few who specializes in elder fraud cases. I'll find the number for you. An hour later, I was holding a business card in my hand. Rowan Jett, attorney at law, elder rights and financial protection. Her office was in an old brick building downtown. The secretary said she had an opening that same afternoon. It felt like the universe was telling me, go now, before you change your mind. At 2:30, I stepped into the office. My shoes felt heavier than they should have. The receptionist smiled and said, Mrs. Toiver, right this way. Mrs. Jett is expecting you. I'd expected a stiff, formal woman in a dark suit. Instead, I met someone, warm. Rowan looked to be in her 60s, with close-cropped silver hair and a cobalt blouse that made her eyes brighter. Her handshake was firm. Tell me everything, she said simply, sitting across from me with a notepad. So I did. I started from the letter. I told her about Harper's voice on the phone, dismissive and slightly irritated. I told her about the party, the SUV, the house online, Harper's visit, the way she'd taken the letter from my hands like it belonged to her more than me. Rowan listened quietly, making occasional notes. When I finished, she leaned back and said, This, Mrs. Toiver, is a textbook case of identity theft, and what makes it worse is that it involves your own daughter. I swallowed. Do you think she really did it? What do you think? She asked gently. I looked down at my hands. I think she did, and I think she didn't expect me to notice. Rowan nodded. Unfortunately, it's more common than you'd think. Children taking advantage of elderly parents because they believe they'll get away with it. She always wanted more, I murmured. When she was little, she threw tantrums over second place. She wanted the best dress, the best grades, the most attention. I thought it was just ambition, but now I wonder. Do you have any other family involved in your finances? Rowan asked. I hesitated. Lennox, my son, once asked me to give him power of attorney, said it would be safer. I said no. He was furious. Rowan made another note. Have your children tried to get you to sell your house? All the time, I said. Lately, Harper's been saying it's too big for me. Lennox has already scoped out apartments. Nice retirement places, they say. She set down her pen. Do you have a will? Yes, it splits everything evenly between Harper and Lennox. Have you thought about changing that? I have, I admitted, lately. Rowan was quiet for a moment, then said, You have 3 legal options. The first is to report this to the police. It could lead to criminal charges. The second is to file a civil suit to void the loan. The third, let her get away with it, I finished. Rowan nodded. In the hope she'll make the payments and no harm will come to you. I looked out the window. A small succulent sat on the sill, thick leaves stretching toward the sun. It reminded me of myself, resilient, slow-growing, easy to overlook. I turned back to her. What happens if I do nothing? The bank will eventually foreclose, she said softly. You'll lose the house. You may even owe money, and none of that will be Harper's problem unless you make it her problem. I didn't speak. The clock ticked quietly in the background. Rowan leaned forward. I've seen this before, Mrs. Toiver, and I'll tell you what I tell every client in your position. This isn't just about the money. It's about whether you still believe you deserve to be protected. I blinked. My throat felt tight. I do, I said. And for the first time in a long, long time, I meant it. I didn't leave Rowan's office with fire in my chest. I left with something quieter and heavier, a sense of clarity that felt more like mourning than resolution, mourning the idea of who I thought my children were, mourning the idea that family, by definition, meant protection. When I got home, I found the house just as I had left it, still, silent, indifferent. It didn't offer comfort, but at least it didn't lie to me. I made tea and sat by the window. The rain had started again, soft at first, then steadier. I watched it bead down the glass in crooked lines. I thought of Harold. He used to say, rain made everything look honest, like even the sky had something it couldn't keep inside. I picked up the phone and called Audrey. She answered on the first ring. "You've been on my mind," she said. "What did the lawyer say?" I told her everything. Rowan's calm voice, the 3 options laid out like cards in a losing hand, the fact that doing nothing would almost certainly cost me my home. There was a pause. Then Audrey said, "Sue her." "I can't," I said, because it was the first answer that rose instinctively. "She's my daughter." "She's a criminal," Audrey countered, without even softening the word. "You have every right to protect yourself. She'll lose everything, her job, her house, her reputation, and maybe Zoe." Audrey's voice shifted, lower now. "And what do you lose if you don't act? Your home? Your name? Your peace of mind?" I stared out the window. A young couple passed under a shared umbrella, laughing at something neither of them would remember tomorrow. "I just wish it wasn't her," I whispered. "Winnie," Audrey said, gently but firmly, "you've spent your whole life giving people the benefit of the doubt, but there's a difference between forgiveness and enabling. This wasn't an accident. She planned this. She counted on you not fighting back." We talked for a while longer, about Rowan, about the law, about options and timing. Audrey said she'd support me no matter what, even if I chose silence, but she hoped I wouldn't. After we hung up, I sat in the darkening room for a long time. Later that evening, the phone rang again. It was Audrey. "Winnie," she said, breathless, "are you sitting down?" My heart skipped. "What is it?" "Paige just called me. My granddaughter. She works part-time at Silver Spoon Catering. Guess who just booked a housewarming party for this Saturday at Lakeview Terrace?" I didn't answer. "Harper," Audrey said. 40 guests, champagne, appetizers, all top shelf. I closed my eyes. Of course she was throwing a party. Of course she hadn't invited me. "Winnie," Audrey said, "are you okay?" "Yes," I said quietly. "Thank you for telling me. This is important." "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer her, not because I didn't know, but because something had begun to crystallize in me. Not rage, not revenge, but something older and steadier. The need to be seen, the need to no longer be the silence that filled the spaces around other people's decisions. After we ended the call, I stood in the kitchen and stared at the wall calendar. Saturday, just 3 days away, the house I had unknowingly purchased, the guest list that didn't include the woman whose name was on the deed. The next morning, I called Rowan. "I know exactly where and when to find her," I said. There was a pause on the other end. "Are you suggesting," she said slowly, "that we serve her at the party?" "Yes," Rowan hesitated. "It's unconventional, but not illegal. A court officer can serve her anywhere. Home, work, a party. It will cause a scene." "She's already caused one," I said. "I just haven't had a chance to respond." Rowan was silent for a moment longer. Then, "All right, I'll speak to the bailiff, but I have to ask, do you really want to be there when it happens?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because she needs to see that I showed up." The day of the party was warm and bright, one of those rare afternoons when even the wind feels rehearsed. I had woken early and sat for a long time on the edge of the bed, staring at the closet. Eventually, I chose the same navy dress I'd worn to Zoe's birthday. It felt appropriate somehow, quiet, proper, dignified, like armor. Rowan had arranged for us to meet the bailiff, a man named Mr. Elliot Nash, at a cafe not far from Lakeview Terrace. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting beneath the awning, a glass of iced water sweating beside her. "Are you sure?" she asked as I approached. "Yes," I said. "I want to be there." Mr. Nash stood when I arrived. He was tall, with a neutral expression and a kind voice. "We'll be discreet," he said. "I'll pose as a catering assistant. Once I confirm her identity, I'll serve the papers." Rowan added gently, "You don't have to say anything. You can stand back if you'd prefer." I shook my head. "No, I won't hide anymore. She needs to know this isn't something that happened to her. It's something she did." We walked the short distance to the house. I had only seen it online before. Shiny photos, marketing angles. In person, it was even more grand. 2 stories, panoramic windows, a wraparound deck facing the lake. A white hydrangea bush bloomed beside the driveway like a well-timed flourish. Laughter and music floated from the open windows. Cars lined the curb. People in cocktail dresses mingled near the entrance. This was the dream Harper had stolen my name to buy. We walked up the path, and Mr. Nash rang the bell. A young woman in black, likely part of the catering staff, opened the door. "Oh, good," she said. "More help? We were expecting extra staff." "That's us," Mr. Nash replied, without blinking. "I'm with the quality control team, and this is the client liaison." She stepped aside without question. We entered the house. It smelled of citrus and something sweet. Every surface gleamed. A massive chandelier hovered over the entryway, dripping light. Music played from hidden speakers. It was, by every definition, a showpiece, a life arranged for admiration. Harper was in the center of the room, laughing. She wore a beige silk dress and heels that clicked lightly as she moved. She had always known how to appear composed in crowds. That was her gift, charm that looked effortless, but was calculated down to the last button. The moment she saw me, the laughter stopped. Her face changed, not dramatically, but enough, like someone who spots a hairline crack in a mirror and knows it will spread. "Mom," she said, her voice uncertain, then sharper. "What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, Mr. Nash stepped forward. "Mrs. Harper Caldwell?" "Yes," she said slowly. "Who are you?" "My name is Elliot Nash, court bailiff. I'm serving you with notice of a civil lawsuit filed by Wyfred Toiver." He handed her the envelope. Around us, the room had quieted. Conversation stalled. Glasses paused mid-air. Even the music seemed to soften. Harper didn't take the envelope right away. Her hands stayed limp at her sides. "What is this?" Frank asked, moving in beside her. His voice was too loud, too casual. "A joke?" "No," I said softly but clearly. "It's the truth. Your wife forged my name on a loan for $950,000. She bought this house using my identity, and now she's being held accountable." Harper's hand finally moved. She took the envelope, fingers trembling. "You're making a scene," she hissed, "in front of everyone." "No," I said. "You made a choice. I'm simply naming it." Mr. Nash turned to me. "My job here is complete unless you need anything else." I shook my head. "Thank you." He nodded and left quietly, slipping out like a shadow. Harper turned back to me. Her face had gone pale, but her voice was cold steel. "You need to leave." "This house is in my name," I replied. "At least on paper. I have every right to be here." Frank looked between us, visibly uncomfortable. "Let's not do this here," he said. "Let's talk privately, please." "There's nothing left to talk about," I said. "Everything I needed to say is now in writing." I turned slowly and looked at the room, the furniture, the lighting, the polished perfection of it all. It's a beautiful house, I said. It's a shame you won't be living in it much longer. Harper flinched. Her voice cracked as she said, "You don't get to ruin this, not today." "I didn't ruin anything," I answered. "You did, when you decided that your ambition was worth more than my trust." A murmur moved through the room. People shifted. Someone set a glass down a little too hard. That was when Zoe appeared at the edge of the room. She had come down the stairs barefoot, holding a book. Her eyes scanned the scene with confusion. "Grandma," she said, "what's happening?" Harper turned sharply. "Zoe, go upstairs, now." But Zoe didn't move. She looked at me instead. "Why are you mad?" I forced a smile, soft and steady. "I'm not mad, sweetheart. I just came to say goodbye." Then I turned and walked out the front door. The street was still warm as I stepped out of the house, but the light had shifted. It was that late afternoon softness that makes even well-kept houses look like shells. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see Harper's expression. I had already lived for years with the shape of her disappointment. Today she finally tasted mine. I walked slowly to the corner where Rowan waited in her car. She didn't ask questions. She just opened the passenger door and let me sit with the silence. "You did what you came to do," she said after a few minutes, "and you did it with more dignity than most." I nodded but didn't speak. I wasn't angry. I wasn't proud. What I felt was something quieter, like a tremor that hadn't quite left the body. I had said my truth aloud, not to shame, but to set a boundary. And somehow, that act, so small in the grand scheme of things, had cracked something open inside me. That night, I sat at my kitchen table long after the sun had disappeared. The phone didn't ring. There were no messages, no apologies, no denials, just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the old wall clock Harold once hung with such care. Around 10, Audrey called. "Well?" she asked. "How did it go?" "They know now," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You don't sound triumphant." "It doesn't feel like a victory," I said truthfully. "It feels like a line in the sand, a line I should have drawn years ago." "That's still something," Audrey said. "Most people never draw it at all." The next morning, my phone rang again. But this time, it wasn't Harper or Lennox. It was Rowan. "Good news," she said. "The clinic confirmed your alibi for the day of the loan. You were at St. Elizabeth's from 8:30 a.m. to 3:45 p.m. with full documentation, and the loan was signed at 11:20 a.m. So I couldn't have been in two places at once." "Exactly," she said. "We now have medical records, a handwriting expert's preliminary review, proof of property registration to a shell company tied to Harper's husband, and financial traces showing the loan payments were being made by that same company." "And the bank?" "I filed the document request. They're cooperating, for now. We'll know soon if anyone inside helped bypass the verification process, especially your daughter's old acquaintance, Tyler Pratt." I remembered the name from Zoe's birthday. Lennox had said something in passing. Harper used to date a Tyler back in college. If it was the same man, it would explain a lot. "She built a whole system," I said quietly. "She didn't just lie. She planned it, layer by layer." "That's what makes this case strong," Rowan replied. "And that's what makes it harder to forgive." I thanked her and hung up. That afternoon, I sat outside with a cup of tea and watched the neighborhood move around me. Kids on bikes, a couple walking their dog, Mrs. Ellis next door watering her geraniums. Life, unbothered, continued. I had never been one for drama. I didn't like conflict. Even in my younger years, I had preferred quiet compromise over loud correction. But compromise had led me here, to a place where my silence was mistaken for weakness and my kindness for ignorance. 3 days passed without a word from either of my children. On the fourth day, Audrey called again. "Winnie," she said, "Paige just told me something wild. After you left the party, things unraveled. Frank and Harper had a fight in front of the guests. Something about the loan and the house and the lies." I didn't respond. "She didn't tell him everything, apparently," Audrey continued. "And now he knows. And Lennox, he left immediately. Looked like he'd seen a ghost." I imagined it, the way the air must have changed once the door closed behind me, the way lies shift when you shine light on them. I didn't feel vindicated, but I felt still. The following week, I received official confirmation that Harper had been served. The legal process had begun. There would be motions and hearings, disclosures and statements. It would take time. I wasn't in a hurry. I'd waited years to be heard. What struck me most was how empty the days felt afterward, not because of loss, but because of clarity. For so long, I had kept myself small, worried that any ripple might disturb the fragile peace I shared with my children. But peace built on suppression isn't peace, it's pause. And now that pause had ended. It began with silence, not the strained hush after a family argument, but a more calculated absence. Harper didn't call. Lennox didn't text. Their silence wasn't the result of guilt or reflection. It was waiting. They assumed, perhaps even counted on, that I would break the rhythm, that I would back down, as I always had, for the sake of peace. But peace had long since left our family. All that remained was avoidance. Rowan called with updates. The documents were moving forward. Harper's legal team had acknowledged receipt. There was no apology, no concession, just formal, cold language designed to hold the truth at a distance. Still, I waited, not for reconciliation, but for some sliver of recognition. That never came. Then Lennox showed up, unannounced. He stood at my door with that same expression he wore at birthdays and funerals, a face arranged for civility, not sincerity. He didn't ask to come in. He simply stepped across the threshold, expecting the space to bend around him. In the kitchen, he spoke as if reading from a script, about family, about reputation, about how I was hurting everyone. I watched his hands as he gestured, still adorned with the expensive watch he never took off, as if it might prove his words meant something. He said I was destroying the family, that Harper had been handling it, that Zoe was confused, that I should drop the lawsuit before things got worse. I didn't interrupt. I didn't raise my voice. I simply asked quietly whether he had known. His pause was brief, but telling. When he left, he didn't slam the door. He didn't need to. His disappointment hung in the air like the scent of cologne, lingering, artificial, and meant for someone else's benefit. That evening, I sat by the window and realized something colder than betrayal. They didn't believe what they had done was wrong. To them, I wasn't a person who had been violated. I was an inconvenience who had broken the pattern. The next morning, I called Rowan. I told her I wouldn't accept the settlement, that I was ready for court. She didn't press. She simply said, "Then we begin." The hearing was set for late spring. I remember sitting in the courthouse hallway, feeling oddly calm. Harper arrived with her lawyer, carefully dressed, but with a certain fatigue beneath the surface, like someone trying to wear normalcy as armor. She didn't look at me. Inside, the proceedings were steady. Rowan presented our case with quiet precision, the medical records placing me at St. Elizabeth's the day the loan was signed, the handwriting analysis, the real estate filings under her husband's company, the payments made from that same account. Harper's lawyer pushed back weakly, suggesting I had consented verbally or had forgotten. The judge, an older woman with clear eyes and a tired patience, didn't seem moved. After the session, the judge suggested both parties consider settlement. In the hallway, Harper approached. Her words were soft, measured. She mentioned Zoe. She hinted at reputational damage. She asked what I really wanted, but she never said she was sorry. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. A week later, the ruling came. The courtroom was still, as if it too had stopped breathing for a moment. The judge delivered the decision with measured clarity, no dramatics, no commentary. The loan was voided. The bank was instructed to remove my name from all obligations. Harper was ordered to pay damages, $20,000, not for what she took, but for what she fractured. She didn't look at me when the words were read. She didn't look at anyone. Her posture was stiff, her face carefully neutral, as though this wasn't happening to her but to someone she barely knew. Lennox sat behind her, his jaw tight, eyes staring into a corner of the room as if hoping it would swallow him whole. Neither of them acknowledged me as they left. The door closed behind them with a hush that felt like a verdict in itself. Rowan turned to me and said that we'd won, but the word felt foreign in my mouth. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel relieved. I felt finished. The kind of finish that comes not with applause, but with the quiet settling of dust after a storm has already passed. The fallout came quickly. The house Harper had bought under my name was seized by the bank. She and Zoe moved into a small apartment near the city's edge. Frank filed for divorce. Audrey told me in hushed tones that he'd been blindsided, not by the scandal itself, but by how much Harper had hidden from him. And Lennox, true to form, disappeared entirely. His silence no longer stung. It just confirmed what had long been true. His loyalty was never to fairness, only to ease. Deirdre, his wife, sent one final message, short, cold. Please refrain from contacting the children. They're too young to be exposed to this level of tension. I didn't reply, not because I accepted her terms, but because I had nothing left to offer where honesty was unwelcome. There were no congratulations from neighbors, no phone calls from extended family. Most of them, I imagine, had heard enough through whispers, pieced together just enough to be afraid of taking a side. I didn't blame them. It's easier to avoid a fire than to name the smoke for what it is. My days became quiet again. But this quiet was different. It wasn't the numbness of being overlooked. It was the stillness of being alone without apology. I planted herbs. I rearranged the guest room. I learned how to video call so Audrey and I could plan our long-promised trip. For the first time in years, I cooked only what I wanted to eat, and I left dishes in the sink if I felt like it. I read books without checking the clock. I stopped measuring myself against their absence. Then one afternoon, Rowan called with a quiet note in her voice. The bank had offered additional compensation, $15,000. They wanted to avoid any further investigation into their employees' conduct. They didn't admit fault, but the money spoke where their words would not. I accepted it, not because it made me feel better, but because it reminded me I'd done something they hadn't expected. I'd stood up. I'd refused to disappear. That summer, Audrey and I went to Italy. It was hot, busy, wonderful. We stayed in small guest houses and ate slowly, never rushing to the next thing. One night in Venice, I sat by the Grand Canal with a notebook on my lap. I didn't write. I just held the weight of its empty pages, letting them remind me how much of my life I still had left to decide. When we returned, the house felt warmer, not because anything had changed, but because I had. I wasn't waiting for a call. I wasn't checking the mailbox for an apology. I wasn't rehearsing what I should have said. I had said it, and more importantly, I had meant it. The envelope was heavy, not physically. It was just paper and ink, but in the way certain things arrive too late to change anything, yet still expect to. A new lawyer, a new tone. Harper's proposal came printed on thick paper with formal phrasing and legal insulation. She would repay the loan in full, settle the damages, issue a statement, one carefully worded and devoid of admission. In return, I would sign a non-disclosure agreement. I would agree never to speak publicly and, most importantly, never to pursue criminal charges. They called it an opportunity for closure, a gesture of peace. Closure, in their language, meant silence. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the kitchen table beside my tea and let it sit there for 3 days. I moved around it, let it remind me it was waiting, just like Harper always waited, for the moment I'd decide to make things easy again. But I no longer made things easy. Not for them, not for anyone who had once mistaken my gentleness for permission. When I finally read it, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel vindication. I felt distance, as if the woman they were negotiating with wasn't me, but some flattened version of me they had imagined, a mother who wanted quiet more than respect, peace more than truth. There was a time when I would have accepted, when I would have traded silence for a sliver of belonging, but not now. I sent it back, unsigned. The next day, Harper called. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was careful, rehearsed. She asked if I'd received the offer. I said I had. She waited, then asked if I would consider signing it. I didn't respond right away. I let the pause stretch, not as punishment, but as space for her to fill or to sit in. She didn't fill it, so I spoke. I told her I didn't want anything from her, not money, not performance, not protection. I didn't need her statement. What I needed was never hers to give. It had been taken too deliberately, too slowly, over too many years. She asked what I was trying to prove. I said it wasn't about proving anything. It was about living the rest of my life without shrinking for people who never made room for me in the first place. She said something about Zoe, about consequences, about how children shouldn't be dragged into the mistakes of adults. And I agreed. That's why I didn't lie. That's why I refused to help her build another version of the truth, carefully edited and devoid of cause. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just hung up. And for the first time, the click didn't sting. It freed something. After that, there were no more calls, no more letters, just silence. But this time, it wasn't waiting. It was aftermath. Frank finalized the divorce. Zoe remained with Harper, though I heard, through Audrey's granddaughter, that joint custody had been filed. Lennox never reached out again. His absence became less a wound and more a natural border, like a fence that had always been there, now simply visible in daylight. The town moved on. People stopped whispering. New stories replaced mine. I walked to the market, browsed books at the library, sat on park benches without bracing for glances. No one asked questions. No one brought it up. I was free to be unseen, but not erased. At home, the days became longer and lighter. I started taking walks before dinner, often with Audrey. We talked less about what had happened and more about what came next. She encouraged me to travel again, to paint, to take classes. She reminded me that I still had time that now belonged only to me. One afternoon, while dusting the hallway shelves, I came across a photograph of Zoe as a toddler. She was wearing a paper crown and holding a crayon like a scepter. I didn't cry. I didn't clutch it. I just looked at it for what it was, a moment, untouched by what came after, a fragment of love that didn't have to be rewritten. I placed it back on the shelf, not out of longing, but because I no longer needed to hide the memory. By the end of summer, I had booked another trip with Audrey, this time to the Scottish coast. I bought a new coat, warm, waterproof, soft blue. The kind of thing I used to say I didn't need. The kind of thing I now chose without explanation. I didn't tell anyone. not because it was secret, but because it was mine. Autumn came slowly that year, not with cold, but with clarity. The leaves outside my kitchen window shifted to gold in quiet agreement with the season. Even the air seemed to move differently, lighter, more honest. I found myself noticing small things again, the exact shade of tea in my cup, the way the wind moved through the hedge, the pause before a bird took flight. I had thought the hardest part would be the silence, but the truth was, I no longer feared being forgotten. What I had feared for most of my life was being remembered incorrectly, remembered as someone who tolerated too much, who stood by while others redrew the lines of her life without asking permission. That woman no longer lived here. Now there was just me. I still heard things through the town's quieter channels. That Harper had taken a position in another city. That Zoe was adjusting, though she had grown more withdrawn. That Frank was seen at the farmer's market some weekends, buying bread alone. That Lennox and Deardra had hosted a party without inviting any family, and when asked, simply said, "It's better this way." Perhaps they were right. What they didn't understand, and what I no longer tried to explain, was that there's a difference between cutting someone off and letting them go. The former is violence, the latter is grace. I let them go, and in doing so, I let myself return. The days settled into a rhythm. I joined a reading group at the library. Audrey and I volunteered at the local shelter on Thursdays. I cooked more, not because I had to, but because the scent of simmering broth made the house feel warm, even when no one else was home. I stopped measuring joy by company and instead began to recognize it in solitude. Sometimes I thought about Zoe, about the bracelet I had given her, still wrapped, unopened. I no longer wondered if she would reach out. If she ever did, I would meet her with open hands, not expectations. But until then, I let her go too, not with bitterness, but with permission to find her own truth in her own time. Some evenings I reread my case file, not out of obsession, but as proof. Not proof that I had won, but that I had not vanished. That there had been a moment when I stood up, not for revenge, not even for justice, but for myself. Harold once told me that dignity was what you held onto when everything else had been taken. I didn't understand it fully then. I do now. The last weekend of November, Audrey and I sat on the back porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the wind sweep the garden bare. She asked me if I had regrets. I told her no. Not because I didn't miss what I used to imagine we were. Not because I didn't wish some moments could have gone differently, but because regret implies a choice I might have made otherwise. And there had been no other choice, not if I wanted to keep the parts of myself that still felt intact. The people who needed me to be small had left, and those who stayed never asked that of me. I had become someone I could trust. Before the first frost, I planted a row of tulip bulbs along the edge of the yard. It was late in the season, but I knew they would come up, quietly, persistently, without apology. Their beauty would not be loud, but it would be rooted, like me. In the end, I wasn't the woman they tried to erase. I was the woman who remained. And that was enough.